You guys remember learning about transitive property? If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. If God gives powers to demons and demons deceive people, then God deceived people. God's responsible here. 1 Kings 22:20-22. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking and going to his death there? So God needs this to happen. This is, again, just clear evidence there's no free will. God is like up in heaven. He's consorting, by the way, with his council of spirits. And he's like, we got to get Ahab to die. Any ideas, guys? And here's what happens. One suggested this, another that. Finally, a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him. By what means? The Lord asked. I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all his prophets, he said. You will succeed in enticing him, said the Lord. Go and do it. Maybe the worst verse in the Bible. It's up there. It shows a God that doesn't know everything, that relies on other spirits to help him, that shows how man-made this myth is because it looks like a king and his council, and we see that all over the Old Testament. The spirits are obviously okay with lying and suggest to do so, and God does take full responsibility. It is only at his word, go and do it, and it will be successful. God allows it. God endorses it. God creates it. Ezekiel 20:25, I also gave them over to statutes that were not good and laws they could not live by. Laws they could not live by means sin, and yet God says we will never be tempted to sin beyond what we can handle, and that he will always provide a way out. Always provide a way out. Laws that they could not obey. Anyone else see the issue there? Romans 11:8. As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that could not see and ears that could not hear to this very day. Once again, just showing that it is God doing these things. God sending these spirits out, interrupting our free will, allowing us to think differently, live differently, or be deceived. 1 Samuel 16:13-15. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him, David, in the presence of his brothers. And from that day, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Saul's attendants said to him, see, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Which I think that verse is hilarious, by the way. Like, Saul's pretty aware. But don't worry, this can all be cured with some good harp music, which is God orchestrating to get David in front of Saul to have this whole thing begin to happen. Completely eviscerating free will. And this isn't the only example. I didn't even have this one written down. By the way, there's hundreds more of all of this kind of stuff. But I'm just now thinking about Nebuchadnezzar, whose punishment is to have his mind taken from him, essentially. And what is that? That's for like 7 years, right? Crawling around like an animal. Why all this matters so much? It's not just because of how unfair it makes our time here on earth. It's about the eternal consequence of such. And I'll narrow down. I had so many written here, but I'm only going to cover a few. Ephesians 5:6. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. So this just perfectly lays out the correlation. When you get deceived, you will disobey. When you disobey, God will punish you. It's just not fair. If one is deceived, they're not trying to disobey. That's what being deceived means. So God punishing someone for this, for God of pure righteousness and justice, he's like the worst judge ever. Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. You know what would make more sense if we just changed it a little? You cannot be deceived, for God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. That would make perfect sense. God sets it up so that we can't be deceived, and thus we are responsible for our actions, which also, by the way, to be truly responsible for our actions, we would have to understand all of the things that are indeed wrong. We would have to be able to know for a fact that this God exists and that his law is the correct one. And if you go back to what we were saying at the beginning of this video, we are so confused about which spirits to follow, and the way that we're supposed to test these spirits is so inept that I don't think any punishment is fair at all for any of these creations, because it's so flawed from the very first ones with Adam and Eve. The whole concept is truly flawed. And I'm going to end with this verse because I think it's just going to sum it all up. 1 Corinthians 6:9. Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. You will not inherit the kingdom of God, which is supposed to be our greatest reward. And we can't get our greatest reward if we've been deceived. But by definition, I believe being deceived is outside of our control. And thus the whole house of cards crumbles.